What to you is at the crux, by like realistically as an author, I guess, but from a technical perspective, what to you is at the crux of horror and writing horror?
Oh, that is a big question.
Oh, no.
I think for me, and I think, I think it does vary, and, horror is a broad church, but for me, it's a really safe space to kind of explore, our deepest fears, and also things that are kind of a little bit taboo as well, that we maybe don't know how to voice in sort of everyday situations and stuff. And I think horror kind of gives you this space to kind of, go to places that are really uncomfortable, but then also have a kind of, safe return as well.
I think that's a great answer. And you're absolutely right, because like you've got the out of going, oh, but it's just like it's supernatural or it's psychological or it's just not real. So
yeah, and also I think a way of exploring fears in a kind of more fantastical kind of way, because you can go supernatural with them and you can bring in monsters and stuff, so you don't have to confront the thing directly necessarily. Yeah.
And there's the ambiguity as well, I think, which is really powerful. There's a lot of discussion that you can have from an academic to a layperson about the power of ambiguity as a conceptual space for play. And I think your story actually did that really, really well. That ambiguity of, it's very psychological, I think. I'm trying to like not spoil it, but I think there's definitely a psychological component. And with psychological, you ask yourself, well, is it real or is it not real? My second question, and the specific question I'm asking about your text, I'm veering a tiny bit off, and I'm asking more actually about Margot, the author. And I'm just drawing the connection between your story in Hometown Haunts, which I can't pronounce, so you can see I'm really working around it. And
Uri Helene,
thank you very much. I could have asked before we started recording, but why deny the audience the fun of their submission? So Uri Helene and Neverland both really heavily feature the sea and swimming and that psychological component as well. I'm really interested in that I know I could be drawing, a link where there isn't necessarily, just so happens, but I'm interested to know if there is like an ongoing psychological or, just a thematic interest in that across your writing.
Yeah, I haven't thought super deeply about that. I know it's really there. And I think it's, for me, like, I'm such a beach person, and like I've lived by the water for most of my life. And for me, the sea is kind of, it's kind of, even though I've written about it in quite a scary way, I guess this time, it's sort of a really safe space for me. And it's kind of when I'm feeling overwhelmed and anxious, which characters in my stories often do, the sea is where I go to sort of be calm. And in Uri Helene, the sea is Tam, my protagonist, sort of, it's what she knows, it's what's familiar to her, even though it's kind of, more of a rough, wild sort of space. And for her, it's really being in a swimming pool, which is contained and artificial and sort of a little bit uncanny. That's the really scary thing. And trying to adapt to that sort of sleek, polished space, I guess.
I really enjoyed that. No, that makes sense. That makes total sense. Just it's a major motif in your life.
I'm not, it's not intentional, but it has sort of become, and I think particularly with the Hometown Haunts story, the protagonist Tam is from a small fictional town on the York Peninsula, which is where I spent a lot of my time as a kid. We had a little shack on the water in a town called Kabowie, and it's sort of, it wasn't what you think of when you think of like a beach holiday. It's quite rough there. There's been a lot of shipwrecks and things, and it's quite a strange landscape. It's lots of sort of limestone and salt pans and things. So it's kind of this eerie, but also really beautiful space. And it was really lovely to sort of write a story that had a root in that location.
No, it was really lovely. And I really enjoyed the construction of your prose as well. Like I think there was a lot of alliteration and a lot of sibilance that really conjured, I think, the technical construction of that, and the description of the shipwreck as well, just as you were saying it. I really like, it was very evocative. It was very, just really nice. I don't know if you want to say that a horror book is nice, but like, it was as an author, it was very enjoyable to read from that component as well.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, you're very
Yeah,
welcome.
I do kind of like stuff that, you know, is kind of beautiful, but then you kind of think about, you're like, oh, actually, that's kind of, so I was kind of going for this, like, I want this to be enjoyable to read, and I want the horror to kind of creep up on you a little bit. So
Yeah,
hopefully
I think that's exactly what it did. And I actually would argue that horror and thriller are the space for that to, like, for that to, you know, that beautiful writing to suddenly flip and be quite unsettling. Like it's almost like that, you know, unnatural perfection as well. Like I think absolutely.
yeah. Sorry, just on that, yeah, like one of the horror sort of creators that I love, who I think does that really well, is Mike Flanagan, who does like the Haunting of Hill House TV series, and most recently Midnight Mass. And like, I just watched Midnight Mass, and it's like every frame of it is just beautiful, and you know, you could freeze it and just like put it on the wall, but then it's also just really unsettling and stuff. So he's a huge inspiration for me. I love his work.
Yeah, and like Parasite as well. I don't know if you'd call Parasite horror per se, but it's so beautifully shot. Like even in the monsoon where we've like everything's kind of gone to hell, the shots of the monsoon and the streets of Seoul are just stunning. And it's so unsettling, but it's so beautiful. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Okay, final question. Do you have anything to like hint at on the horizon as like upcoming writing projects or things for us to watch out for or look forward to?
Oh gosh. I think I'm kind of in that boat of creators who have kind of just hit a bit of a wall during COVID. So I was working on a story and I got halfway through lockdown, or not lockdown, we weren't in lockdown here, but just halfway through this sort of pandemic, I guess, and just was just like, this just isn't working. And so I've actually started working on a new manuscript, which is, I think, going okay, but it's completely different. And it's something that's completely out of my comfort zone. So I'm not quite sure how it's going to end up, but I'm really excited about that. And I'm also, because I've been reading all these horror short stories, which has been my go-to during the pandemic, I'm really struggling to read longer works. So I've been reading a lot of particularly horror anthologies. So I'm actually trying to write some more horror short stories. So we'll see how those go as well. So I've got a few of those that I'm working on at the moment. So yeah, I feel like I'm kind of in a sort of working things out phase at the moment. So yeah, hopefully some good stuff next year.
I feel like you'll coincide with the reopening of society.
Maybe.
You've timed it perfectly. Yeah. That's it. It's part of a grand plan. I love it.
Yeah, but I think you know, talking to a lot of writer friends, and I don't know if you found this, but just the last 2 years trying to write with just everything going on has just been bizarre, and I think really difficult when you're sort of trying to work on long form stuff has just been really challenging, I think.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up the final book in the God's Kiss continent, so I kind of like, it's not a project that I can sort of leave, if that makes sense. Funnily enough, I've just written an Ask Alice about November's Ask Alice is about how do you maintain momentum. My go-to is, even if it's just 20 words, I've contributed for the day. I've moved the project forward. I'm thinking about it. I've put something, you know, there's something more than was there the day before. And I mean, partly also, if I'm not really the kind of writer that will go back and scrap something. So if I put the 20 words there, it's probably going to stay there. That's kind of what I've been doing. I've really just been going, you know, it is possible to move a mountain one rock at a time. But yes, it's been, I think, also disruptions to schedule, and there's schedule disruption also, like sometimes you just get a crap piece of news at the start of the day and it just throws you terribly. So yes, it's been an exciting time. And like my creativity, like my inspiration's been fired, but and I don't like the myth of the tortured creative, like you need to have inspiration strike when the stars are in alignment and Venus is in retrograde. I don't love that. Like, no, it's a job. You sit down and you produce words. But I do acknowledge that there is a component that, you know, it's tricky. And so I'll move on to another task or I'll do something else. But yes, it's I've had to draw on the well of like, it's okay, just, you know, 200 words is great, do some planning if you can't write the words, have a little bit of a think. So it's been I'm hoping for a renaissance of writing next year.
Yeah, I have found, because obviously here in South Australia, we're not in lockdown, but we have had quite strict caps on sort of numbers for things. So it's really only just recently that we've started having in-person events again. And I went to a book launch a couple of weeks ago, and it was just being around a whole group of writers for the first time in, I don't know, like 18 months. And it was just afterwards, I felt so like the well was full. It was just, I felt so motivated to go sit down, and it was so nice to just sit down and talk with other writers about writing, which there hasn't been that opportunity to do face to face for a really long time. So I think that's going to be a real help, hopefully next year, like just being able to get together with other writers.
Yeah, like you forget that writing is really isolating. Like it's an isolated activity. You write by yourself, and you don't, well, unless you're co-creating, you know, you are the person that's doing it all. And so I think we forget that you do get energized by speaking to other writers. You do get energized by seeing other people's projects, and also seeing them deepen. Like I get really energized. So sometimes if I'm lagging, I haven't done this for a while, but I'll put up like an interview with an author that I really like, or I'm crushing on at the moment. So like I've really enjoyed interviews of like Lee, and I like, you know, people who are really, you know, they've established. And so I like to kind of get in their head and go, well, how did you do that? So like Lee Child, Stephen King are the two that I was really going through a few years ago. And it's really like invigorating to hear them talk about how they work through a plot point and how they work. And, you know, it just sparks off that creativity that I guess encourages you to then create your own stuff. But especially I think when you're also coping with news that's really disheartening and uncertainty, we can let those pieces of like, you know, what do I do? What are my techniques? You can let them fall to the wayside, and you kind of forget about them. So and it's not the same. It's not the same to message someone and be like, hey man, what's going on?
Well, actually, interesting story about how I wrote my story for Hometown Haunts is I saw the call out and I was like, oh, look, I'd love to do that. That'll be amazing, but I don't know when I'm going to fit it in. I'm trying to work on this book. It's not going super well. And then a friend messaged me and said, it was sort of soon after the lockdown we had last year. And she said, look, I'm struggling to write as well. Why don't you come over to my house? My wife's going to watch our kids for the afternoon. So come over like once a week and just work on something. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's like this gift of time. So I went to my friend's house and we sat in her office together, and we both just like worked on our stuff together. And just having another writer there was amazing. Like we talked through plot points, and, we sort of, like would give each other, like we'd read each other little sentences and be like, which one sounds better? And, just being able to sort of have that camaraderie, I guess, was amazing. And also I think like it was sort of really motivating, because it's like, okay, I've been given this time, and also I've got my friend sitting here. I'm not going to be on Instagram doing stuff. I'm not going to get distracted. Like we're both going to kind of like make sure that we actually put words down. And so I went to her house, I think it was like for about 4 weeks. And by the end of it, I had a draft of the story. So that's how the story got done.